Have you ever witnessed or experienced a family dispute involving property? How did you feel at the time? The soft, golden light from the chandelier hanging on the ceiling cast a warm glow over the long table covered with a white tablecloth, where the entire family had gathered to celebrate Grandma's 90th birthday. Laughter and cheerful conversations echoed from every corner of the table. The cozy, familiar atmosphere of a family reunion filled the room. On the table, steaming dishes were passed between family members, and glasses of wine shimmered in the gentle light. Everyone wanted to offer their best wishes to Grandma, the heart of the family for so many years. Grandma sat in her armchair in the living room, a gentle smile on her face, etched with the marks of time. Though her eyesight had faded, her eyes still gazed at her children and grandchildren with deep love. Everyone knew she wasn't as strong as before, but her presence remained the thread that held the family together. But then, amidst the laughter and warmth, a sudden chill crept into the room. Jonathan's mother leaned back in her chair, lifted her wine glass, and exhaled a long, satisfied sigh. Then, as if merely stating an obvious fact, she uttered a sentence that froze everyone in place. "Well, she's going to die soon anyway, and this house will be mine." The words landed like a slap across the face of everyone in the room. The clinking of silverware against plates came to an abrupt halt. No one laughed anymore. No more conversations, no more toasts, just a heavy silence, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Jonathan turned his head slowly, hoping he had misheard. But the look in her eyes, proud and smug, made it clear that she meant every word. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice laced with unmistakable disgust. She shrugged, raising her glass. "Oh, don't act so shocked. Everyone knows she's lived long enough. In the end, this house will be mine. I'm just saying it out loud." Disgust, shock, and anger spread through the room like fire touching oil. She didn't see her own mother as a person anymore, just an obstacle in the way of her inheritance. Jonathan felt the fury rising in his chest, but more than that, a profound sense of disappointment. This was the woman who had given birth to him, someone who should have been the moral pillar of the family. And yet, all she showed today was greed and a complete lack of empathy. Grandma was still in her room, resting, completely unaware that her own daughter had spoken of her as if she were nothing more than a soon-to-be discarded possession. Jonathan looked around the dinner table, stunned faces, wide eyes filled with shock, fingers tightening around wine glasses. His aunt, his mother's younger sister, had turned pale, unable to utter a single word. His cousins exchanged looks as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. The warmth of the celebration had shattered, vanishing into thin air. In its place, only tension, revulsion, and deep sorrow remained. Grandma was still alive, still breathing, still the woman they all loved and respected. And yet, his mother only saw her as something that was about to lose its value, an obstacle standing in the way of her claim to wealth. The room, once filled with lively chatter, now felt suffocatingly silent. Jonathan's aunt, his mother's sister, had turned ghostly pale, her lips quivering, but no words came out. Other relatives looked at each other with horrified expressions. They couldn't fathom how a daughter could speak so casually about her own mother's death. But what was even more terrifying was that Jonathan's mother didn't seem to think she had done anything wrong. She crossed her arms, leaned back in her chair, and smirked in satisfaction, as if she had simply voiced an undeniable truth. "Do you even hear yourself?" Jonathan asked, his voice low but dangerous. She scoffed. "Oh, come on. Don't act all self-righteous. Isn't that what everyone's thinking? Everyone wants their share. You think I don't know that? You're just like them, just waiting for your turn to take what's yours." Her words stabbed through him like a knife. He couldn't believe that his own mother saw him that way. Jonathan had always been independent, He had never relied on family wealth, never expected a single dime from Grandma. The people around them whispered in hushed voices, and the already tense atmosphere thickened even further. Jonathan's aunt slammed her fork down onto her plate, the sharp clatter cutting through the silence. "How can you say something like that without feeling ashamed?" she hissed, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're talking about our mother, the woman who raised you, who loved you. Don't you see how wrong this is?" But Jonathan's mother merely shook her head, the mocking smirk still on her lips. "Oh, please. She's lived long enough. We can't stay stuck in the past forever." Those words struck the entire room like a sledgehammer. His aunt's eyes burned red with fury. Some relatives gaped in disbelief, while others clenched their fists in silent rage. Jonathan felt the anger surge within his chest, but more than anything, he felt a deep, crushing disappointment. How could a mother think this way about her own mother? He took a deep breath, then calmly pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and held the screen up for his mother to see. Her expression changed instantly. The smirk vanished. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her face slowly paled. The number in Jonathan's bank account wasn't small. It not only proved that he had no need for any inheritance from his grandmother, but it also made her realize that she had completely misjudged him. For the next 30 minutes, she desperately tried to salvage the situation. First, she scoffed, claiming Jonathan was just trying to prove a point. When no one responded, she shifted to excuses, saying she was only joking, that everyone was overreacting. But when she saw that no one was taking her side, she finally resorted to apologies, saying she didn't mean it, that she was just too emotional. But Jonathan had already seen her true colors. Her words meant nothing anymore. He pushed his chair back, stood up, and looked straight at his mother. "Tonight is Grandma's birthday. This is not the time to talk about money." His voice was low and firm, carrying the weight of his disappointment. Without waiting for her response, he stepped away from the table and walked out, leaving behind a room full of heavy stares. Jonathan thought it was over. But he didn't know this was only the beginning of a true nightmare. The stroke and the disappearance. Jonathan felt suffocated as he stepped out of his grandmother's house. The atmosphere at the family gathering had become unbearable. The way his mother had so brazenly declared that the house would be hers, as if Grandma was nothing more than an object waiting to be discarded, made his stomach churn with disgust. He drove home, inhaling deeply to steady the storm of emotions raging in his chest. He had once believed that no matter how greedy or selfish his mother was, she would at least never mistreat her own mother, the woman who had given her life and raised her. But he had been wrong. So terribly wrong. When he arrived at his apartment, Jonathan collapsed onto the couch, exhausted both physically and emotionally. He absent-mindedly scrolled through his phone, trying to distract himself. But then, an unexpected call from Emily, his cousin, jolted him upright. "Jonathan, you need to come back now. It's Grandma. Something's wrong with her." A chill ran down his spine. Without asking another question, Jonathan grabbed his car keys and rushed out the door, his heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. Chaos at Grandma's house. When Jonathan burst through the door, he found the entire family gathered in the living room, their faces pale and stricken with panic. His grandmother lay motionless on the couch, her face ashen, her eyes barely open, her lips trembling as if trying to say something but unable to. "What happened?" Jonathan turned to his aunt, his voice filled with worry and confusion. "Your mother? Your mother disappeared right after Grandma collapsed." The words hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. Grandma had suffered a stroke right after he left, and his mother had vanished right after? He swallowed hard, then stepped forward to take his grandmother's hand. Her fingers were colder than usual, but weakly, She squeezed his hand, trying to say something. Growing suspicion. The front door swung open, and paramedics rushed in, pushing a stretcher toward her. The entire family followed anxiously as they lifted Grandma onto the stretcher, their faces still frozen in shock. But inside Jonathan, a different kind of fear was growing. Where had his mother gone? He scanned the room, searching for any sign of her, but everything was empty. The only thing left was the half-finished glass of wine sitting on the dining table, the spot where she had once sat, so smug, so satisfied. Something was wrong. Jonathan didn't want to assume the worst, but the truth was undeniable. His grandmother had suffered a stroke right after his mother didn't get what she wanted. And now she had disappeared without a trace. He clenched his fists, his breathing sharp and tense. What did she do? Facing the terrifying truth. At the hospital, the entire family waited anxiously outside the emergency room, anticipating the doctor's update. Time stretched endlessly, each passing second adding to Jonathan's growing worry. Finally, the doors to the emergency room swung open, and a doctor stepped out, his expression grave. Your grandmother suffered a mild stroke. She is no longer in critical condition, but at her age, any emotional shock could have severe consequences. Do you know if she experienced any distress before collapsing? Jonathan pressed his lips together. Distress? Yes, his mother had tormented her mentally throughout the entire evening. But the most terrifying part was yet to come. Just then his mother walked in, calm, composed, as if nothing had happened. There was no trace of remorse on her face, no sign of a daughter concerned for her own mother's well-being. Jonathan's gaze dropped to her hands and his chest tightened. Under her fingernails was a red stain. It wasn't nail polish. Jonathan stepped right up to her, his face colder and sharper than ever. What did you do? She pulled her hand back, a flicker of unease flashing across her face, before she quickly masked it with indifference. Don't be ridiculous. I just stepped out to get some fresh air. Jonathan didn't believe a single word. The truth was staring him in the face. And the most horrifying part? His grandmother knew what had happened, but she was too afraid to speak. Theft and legal manipulation. Jonathan couldn't sleep. After everything that had happened that fateful night, his mind was a whirlwind of chaotic thoughts. His grandmother was lying in a hospital bed, frailer than ever, and his mother, she had disappeared. But Jonathan knew she hadn't left without a purpose. Someone like his mother never walked away unless there was something else to gain. And his gut feeling was right. At dawn his phone rang, shattering the brief moments of rest he had managed to steal. An unknown number flashed on the screen. He answered, his voice still hoarse from the sleepless night. Your mother just showed up at my office. The slow yet tense voice of Mr. Calloway, the family's longtime attorney, filled the silence. Jonathan sat up immediately. What did she do? She wants me to sign over power of attorney, granting her full control over her mother's assets. Jonathan froze. His mother was trying to declare that Grandma was no longer mentally competent to manage her own estate. If she succeeded, she would have total authority over everything, her bank accounts, her home, every last penny. Jonathan clenched his jaw. Did you sign it? Calloway sighed. I'm not an unethical man, Jonathan. I refused immediately. But that doesn't mean she'll stop. Jonathan gripped his phone tightly. He knew his mother too well. She never gave up, especially when money was involved. He quickly dressed, grabbed his car keys, and called his aunt. We need to get to Grandma's house, now. When they arrived, the front door was unlocked, as if someone had hurriedly gone inside. Stepping into the house, Jonathan's heart sank. The living room was ransacked. Drawers were pulled open, papers scattered across the floor. She's looking for documents, his aunt whispered, her voice trembling. Jonathan bolted up the stairs to his grandmother's room, the place where the most important papers were kept. And then he saw it. The safe was wide open. Empty. Financial records, property deeds, everything was gone. His mother had stolen it all. Jonathan's phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number. I took what belongs to me. Don't try to stop me. Rage surged through his veins. This wasn't just greed anymore. This was blatant betrayal. His mother didn't just want her share. She wanted everything, no matter the cost. He looked up, seeing his aunt standing frozen in the wrecked room, her eyes glistening with anger and heartbreak. What do we do now, Jonathan? She asked, her voice shaky but resolute. Jonathan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay clear-headed. He knew this wasn't just a family matter anymore. This was a legal battle, and he wouldn't let his mother win. We go see the lawyer, he said firmly, with no hesitation left in his voice. The legal showdown. The atmosphere in Calloway's office was thick with tension as Jonathan's mother strode in, her head held high, arms crossed over her chest, like she was the victim of some great injustice. You're all trying to steal what's rightfully mine, she sneered defiantly. Jonathan stared at her, his disgust deeper than ever. How could someone lie so brazenly when they were the real thief? No, you're the one who stole, Jonathan shot back, his voice ice-cold. Calloway slid a stack of documents across the table, his expression calm but sharp. By law, Margaret's assets remain legally hers. The papers you took and attempted to alter will not hold up in court. His mother's face turned pale. That's impossible. I'm her daughter. I have the right. Wrong, Calloway interrupted, his voice unwavering. Margaret updated her will before she was hospitalized. She revoked your inheritance. She froze. What? Jonathan watched as for the first time his mother's confidence cracked into genuine shock. Grandma knew exactly who you were, Jonathan said, his voice carrying more disappointment than anger. She made sure to change her will in time to protect the family from you. Silence engulfed the room. His mother took a step back, her hands trembling as if she couldn't accept this reality. No, this can't be happening. The aftermath. A few weeks later, the house was legally transferred to Jonathan's aunt and other family members. No one cared about his mother anymore. She had been cast out, just as she had once discarded her own mother. Jonathan stood in front of his grandmother's old home, feeling the warmth of true family. No more greed, no more betrayal, just real family. This house had once been a battlefield of selfish schemes, but now it had become a place of peace, just as Grandma had always wanted. After years of being manipulated by his own mother, after all the pain and betrayals, he was finally free from her control. Grandma was gone, but her legacy wasn't money or property, it was love. It was the bond between those who truly valued each other. Jonathan, come inside. Dinner's ready. His aunt's voice called from the kitchen, pulling him from his thoughts. Jonathan smiled and stepped through the doorway. There was no longer tension, no more wary glances, just warmth. Just family. His mother's fate. Not long after being cut out of the will, Jonathan's mother left town. She had no one, no family, nothing to cling to. The people who once flattered and fawned over her had quietly disappeared the moment they realized she no longer had wealth to offer. But she hadn't given up on her ambitions. Through whispers from old acquaintances, Jonathan learned that his mother had found a wealthy man to latch onto, someone she hoped could restore her lavish lifestyle. But everyone knew, relationships built on greed never lasted. Jonathan no longer cared. He had once tried to understand her, tried to mend their relationship, but she had never truly loved or cherished her family. When he shut that door, he freed himself from the past. A real family inside Grandma's home, everything had changed. The old photos remained on the walls, but now they no longer represented a fractured family. They were symbols of unity. Jonathan's aunts and cousins gathered here often, sharing stories about Grandma, about the meals she cooked, the lessons she taught. Every time Jonathan visited, he felt peace. No more tension, no more fights, No more battles over money, just a real family, bound by love, not wealth. And to him, that was the greatest inheritance Grandma could have ever left behind. If you could leave a legacy to your children and grandchildren, what would you want it to be? Material possessions or spiritual values?